Santa Clara Valley chapter of CNPS. I welcome you all to tonight's program. Um, so, can everyone hear me okay at the back? Okay, cool. So, we'll start by reading the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the work done by the Santa Clara Valley chapter of CNPS lies in the homeland of the Yama Mutsun tribal band, the Thamian Nation, the Ramaitush Oloni, and the Muwekma Oloni, who still live and thrive in this area today. We hope to learn from them and support their work to restore traditional practices and heal from historical trauma. So tonight's team, I am Priya, and we have Paul and Deb at the back over there. Um, and of course, our speaker here is Stephanie Morris. If you have not heard of CNPS, how many of you are attending our program for the very first time? Whether online or in person. Okay, welcome. So if you've not heard of CNPS, we are a nonprofit environmental organization founded in 1965. We have more than 13,000 members in 36 chapters, and we are spread all over California and Baja California. So our chapter is the Santa Clara Valley chapter, and it covers Santa Clara County and southern San Mateo County. So the mission of CNPS is to protect California's native plants through science, education, stewardship, gardening, and advocacy. If you're not already a member, I encourage you all to join us and support our important work. By planting and protecting native plants, not only are you creating a wonderful habitat for the creatures in your garden, but you're also helping preserve California's native plant diversity. Some of the membership benefits include you will get Artemisia and Flora. These are two journals which are published by CNPS. Artemisia is a science based journal. It has a lot of science articles which are worth saving. Flora is more general interest. It has gardening information, photographs, interviews, tips on how to grow plants, and lots of pretty pictures. You'll also get discounts at local nurseries. You can join by going to cnps.org/join, or you can scan the QR code on the screen. So I've put together some of the upcoming events that we have for the month of May. This is photo group meeting is something we do online on Zoom. This is a place where uh, anybody can come and share photos, not only just of native plants, but anything related, habitat or places they've been, which they would like to share, local, non-local, anything. And that meeting happens over Zoom. It's on the fourth Fridays of every month from 7 to 9 p.m. So you can just join in to view photos. If you don't want to share photos, you're welcome to just uh, view others' photos and get some photography tips. The next one is this beginner's walk to Franklin Point. This is at Año Nuevo State Park on the San Mateo coast. And Vicky and Tony will be leading a short beginner's walk at this state park, help you botanize what we see there. It's mostly a sandy area, and it's an interesting area of the park. Native Plant ID is again a group, but this is in person, which meets at our office in Palo Alto. Um, so here we help everyone learn the ID skills of different of how to go about identifying native plants. We use lenses, microscopes, or our manuals, and we have some experts also available on hand. This time, the one we have on Tuesday, May 27, is going to focus on salvias. So you're welcome to join that one. And our ongoing habitat restoration projects, we have 4 parks that are supported by our wonderful volunteers. So Lake Cunningham, Katali Park, Kirk Park. Saturday mornings, there are work sessions where people help us weed and plant, water, and generally restore the park. We also do a similar restoration in Edgewood Park. That's on Wednesday afternoons and Friday mornings. So if you want to learn more about these events and others like this, you can get on our weekly mailing list, or you can go to our website. The first link is cnps-seb.org. That's our chapter website, so you can find these events there, or we also run a meetup page. That's CNPS SCV meetup group, and that the second QR code will take you to that. So you'll find all these events and more over there. So with all that's happening, you would very much like to be in touch with what's happening, then you're welcome to join our mailing list. We send announcements of events like this one and others to this mailing list. It's the CNPS-SCB news mailing list. So you'll get one email a week. Sometimes important announcements are also sent to this email list. So to join the mailing list, that's the ID of the Google group, or you can just talk to me and I can add your email to it if you'd like. Just general housekeeping before we get started. Please put your phones on mute. We can finish by around in an hour, so roughly 8:10ish or 10 minutes past 8. And there will be a lot of time after Stephanie's talk to ask questions and get your answers from her. And with that, I want to start. I want to welcome Stephanie. So Stephanie has been designing California native plants for a very long time, since 1999 in the Bay Area. Her goal is to design creative, beautiful landscapes that are ecologically oriented and are practical. Areas of particular focus include suggesting plants for pollinators, converting lawns to drought tolerant plants, incorporating California native plants within existing gardens, and combining edible plants with native plant gardens. So please join me in welcoming Stephanie.
Is part 2 of a 3-part series that we are putting together this year for the first time. It's kind of pieces or talks that have been done before, but we thought let's make this 3-part series. The first part was design, which will hopefully be posted to the YouTube channel soon. This is install, and then we'll have a third part in July. And this is a date for the next talk is going to be maintenance, and that is July 24th. It will also be here at this library. So today our focus is going to be planting and installation. So the actual how to do it. Once you've got your plants, how do you get them in the ground? How do you have the best success possible with natives? And I will go ahead and kind of go through the whole presentation, and then at the end we'll do questions and answers. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. So we're going to talk about site preparation, how to cover the soil, how to actually physically plant the plants, what type of watering systems you might consider, and I'll give you some examples at the end of the talk. The first couple slides are things you can do to plan ahead to sort of get better success when you actually go to plant. So one of the first things is to think about hydrozoning. And I talked about this during the first talk. I just want to briefly review it. This idea is that you group plants together based on what they want. So similar watering needs, similar sun shade requirements. The more you can put those plants together in the first place, and then that way they can keep water together, so they can kind of all be in community together. The idea is that in our gardens, we can kind of replicate nature so that plants naturally are adapted in nature to grow together. And if we put them together in our garden, it makes life a lot easier. So we don't put that super low water sage next to a high water azalea. They want different things, they want different soil, etc. So hydrozoning is basically just putting them together. This is just a little quick example map of how a hydrozone might work out. So you might have lawn alternative plantings together in one zone, mixed sun plantings together in a zone, you put your vegetables together, shade plantings together. So each of these little colored bubbles on this map could potentially represent an irrigation zone when you go to plan your watering system. So if you sort of thought about this from the beginning, then by the time you get to your planting and your irrigation, it all kind of goes together. Up here. Yeah. The other thing to think ahead about is plant spacing, and I have been very guilty of not following this rule. So the idea is to research how big the plant is going to grow and to give it plenty of space to fill into its full size. And the reason that this is really important is because when you first put your plant in the ground, it's going to look like it's so tiny. Like, why is there this tiny little thing in this huge sea of mulch? And I'll show some pictures later that you can get an idea of what that looks like. But to really understand, oh, this plant is going to get 6 feet wide or 2 feet wide and whatever that is, and allow that full space, because otherwise you'll be pruning that plant, it'll be way more maintenance, and things will just look kind of jumbled and messy. And sometimes in our gardens, we'll make conscious choices. Maybe we want to put things closer together to have kind of more of a wild cottage garden look, or we want to put them even farther away than their full growth to have more of a spare, simple look where you can really walk around in between plants. So just to make conscious decisions and realize that sometimes in our gardens, plants grow bigger than the books say, or they grow bigger than you'll see them if you're hiking around in nature, just because our soils tend to be a little more rich in the garden. And I will typically, like as a design professional with design background, I'll start with an actual plan like this, where each is a circle on a piece of paper with a representative symbol in it. This could be a quick little pencil sketch, for somebody who wants to do something simpler. But it's really nice to kind of have an idea of how many you're planting and where they're going. And to get more about that, you can go back and watch the first talk, or maybe I'll give that talk again at some point. So having a plan helps you know where things are going. So the ideal planting season is something that we talk about a lot. And the shortest answer to that is that fall is really the ideal season. And fall has kind of shifted a little bit over to the years to now mean more like November, because oftentimes in October, it's still pretty hot. So mid-October is pretty good. Sometimes early October, it's really kind of still like summer around this area. So the earlier you plant, the more hard the soil is going to be. It's going to be very difficult to shovel most yards in the hottest time of the year, the summer or the early fall. And then once we get ready to have our first rain, or after the first rain and before the next one, is the perfect time to plant, because the soil will be much easier to dig. You'll save yourself so much work. And then you can take advantage of the rain by letting the rain actually water the plants. The other thing is that the plants really do not like to be planted when it's super hot and get a lot of water. It just encourages them to get fungal issues and rot. So planting season is good. Like, this is the perfect time of year to start thinking about what you want to put in your garden and then plant in fall. There are a few exceptions to that. Some of our plants can get along a little bit in summer. Some of the salvias I find do pretty well being planted in summer, but ideally if you plant now and plant later, it's better. Avoiding frost is also nice. Like, I'll do a lot of planting in December and January and just make sure I'm kind of doing it before a rain and make sure it's not going to be exceedingly cold right after I plant. I think I covered everything there. Let's see. So I'm going to first talk about site preparation. And this is just kind of a quick example photo on a project I was working on of what it looks like when you've got a bare site and you're ready to plant. Before we actually plant, we're going to think about a couple things. We're going to think about, what is our drainage like? This can even be something that you do before you pick your plants, because if you have a soil that doesn't drain well, you can pick plants that are more adapted to clay soil or more adapted to a little bit less good drainage versus some of our chaparral plants, which want really good drainage. So the quickest way to figure out how your soil drains is to dig a hole, fill it with water, and then actually stick a ruler there or measure on a piece of wood the inches, and then just see how much drains at a specific time, and you can get a sense for how well your soil drains. I'll tell you what to do if your soil does not drain well, which is a lot of us. The other way you can learn more about your soil is you can do a ribbon test. And here what they're doing in the pictures with the hand there is they're actually taking a chunk of soil and they're kind of rubbing it in between their hands and seeing how long that soil stays together. So the longer the soil stays together and the longer it actually forms a ribbon that doesn't break off, the more clay the soil has. And in general, we have sort of three main structural components of soil. There's sand, silt, and clay. And the little triangular chart just sort of tells you how they all work together. The ideal is the middle, which is loam, which is a really even mixture of sand, silt, and clay. Silt is the really fine particle, clay is the middle particle, and sands are the most coarse ones. There were some benefits actually to having clay soil. A lot of us have clay in our soil, but clay is great because it holds a lot of nutrients and it holds a lot of water. So while it doesn't necessarily drain well, it is pretty good for most plants to grow in it as long as we can give them a little bit of help with drainage so that they don't just sit there and rot. And we'll talk about that. So the other things to think about early on are soil health in general. And the better we take care of our soil, the healthier our plants are going to be, because plant health is all coming from its roots. So if we think more about what does the soil need, it naturally helps us have happier plants. The things we want to do are avoid tilling, because anytime we till or rototill or shovel or disturb a whole area of soil, we're destroying the soil structure as well, also increasing the chance that more weeds are going to come up and germinate. So we avoid tilling. We avoid applying chemicals because we're trying to provide habitat and we're trying to have healthy soil. The chemicals also kill the habitat in the soil. We also want to avoid solarization, which is when you'll see people put black plastic or other plastics on there and let the sun just cook the soil, because it's also going to cook the microorganisms in the soil, and we want those microorganisms to thrive, therefore allowing our plant to take up more water through its roots. Mycorrhizae are beneficial soil fungus, and we can encourage those in our soil. You can actually buy products that add mycorrhizae to your soil. And what this organism does is it actually helps the roots take up water and other nutrients. So it makes the plant even more drought tolerant by having this relationship with the organisms in the soil. If needed, when we plant, we can add small amounts of compost or planting mix, but we really don't want to overly amend our soil. For the most part, it's going to be just 25% or less of new soil to mostly native soil. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, as we're getting ready to plant, how we can prepare our yards through land sculpting. And what I mean here is to make some areas of the landscape go down low by excavating and others be higher. And the benefits of this are sort of twofold. The first is you can create a rainwater garden, or places on your property that you actually channel the water to. This keeps the water from going off your property into the gutters and kind of getting lost. It keeps the water on site, which helps the plant roots grow because they're getting all this great winter water. But the time that most natives grow the most is January, February, and early March. That's sort of their spring happens a little earlier when it's actually raining. So if we can keep some of our water on site, we can use it for the plants. And then when we have rainwater gardens like this divot here, which have plants and roots in them, those roots are actually filtering the water and making that water more pure. So it does a lot of different useful things. When we dig out an area like this to put in a rainwater water garden, we end up with extra soil. And so we can use the soil to build mounds. And after this slide, I'll show a few pictures of what it looks like when you have carved out an area and then built a mound. So we would also want to prepare our space to eventually take on cover or sheet mulch, which we'll talk about in further detail as well. One of the things we do is we trim down the edge of the lawn. And the reason we do that is because if we leave an existing lawn or soil right up to the edge of the paving, and then we put chips on top of it, the chips will be higher than the paving. They'll tend to spread all over the paving through people walking on them, or squirrels or birds messing with them. And it just ends up getting messy. And oftentimes the grass or weeds will grow under the cardboard and kind of come around the edge of the paving, which just is really a nightmare to kind of take care of. So we'll cut down the edge here, and then we'll use that soil on site for mounds. So this is an example of a mound that was created on this particular site. You can see they had lawn here. This is during the summer, most likely, because the lawn has already died off. And then they put the soil just right on top like that. And on top of this mound is a great spot to put the plants that need better drainage, because this soil has now been fluffed up a little bit and it's going to drain water better. In some ways, these mounds, they kind of almost mimic a hillside. So in nature, we'll go, hiking up in the hills, we'll see these hillsides full of chaparral plants. They get great drainage because they're on a hillside. Most of our gardens are flat. If we're lucky enough to live on a hill, we might get some natural hills. But if we are flat, we can make our own little mini hills to keep our plants happier. This is another example of an area we dug out. So in this spot, we excavated, we put a downspout pipe into this area. That's that little green circle in the middle of the slide. And we created a little gravel pit so that rainwater can flow in there. This can be done just like this with an excavated little gravel pit, or it can be done just as a big area of kind of excavated space that the water flows into. And they're all considered rainwater gardens. The Valley Water District locally here does have a rebate for doing this type of process as part of your installation. I think it's a $300 rebate for a rainwater garden. And you can kind of see in this picture, the garden, the excavated area kind of extends beyond that cobble. It just hasn't been filled up. And that area can also be filled with plants, just like in the first picture, and those plant roots can then filter the water. So this is a project where we did a rainwater garden and we did some mounds. So you can kind of see what it looked like when nothing was planted yet, but the site is being prepared with some excavating and some soil, and it's kind of makes some nice movement in the landscape. It can bring in some curves. If you have a very rectilinear space that's kind of plain, you can give it some energy and bring in some interest just by how you sculpt the land. And then the mounds would be where the plants are planted in this picture. The next thing I'll talk about is soil cover. So now that we've kind of prepared the site, we figured out where the mounds are going to go, where the rainwater might get collected. What do we do after that? We think about soil cover. And this is a pretty flexible activity. There's ways to do this in many different orders. It's flexible, which is nice. One of the reasons we want to have cover in the first place is because nature automatically has cover, because trees in nature drop their leaves, nobody comes and picks those leaves up, they accumulate on the soil. And then as those leaves decompose, they naturally feed the soil with nitrogen, they feed the microorganisms in the soil. So we're going to replicate that in the garden, and we can do it with leaves if we're lucky enough to have a tree or other leaf source. Or we can do it with wood chips as well. So one of the reasons we use mulch, and I kind of use the word mulch and wood chips a little bit interchangeably, but the reasons we usually would apply the wood chips is we don't typically have a great source of free leaves on project site. And the wood chips, they serve the same purpose. They basically keep the water in because they provide a cover that makes the soil lose water to the air less quickly. So it keeps the water in the soil, which is great because it means that the plants lose less water and therefore they don't need to be watered as much. The other thing is that the mulch can help smother some of the weeds, which makes our job maintaining a little bit easier. And it also keeps the soil a little bit warmer in the winter and a little bit cooler in the summer. Underneath the mulch, about 12 or 15 years ago, we started putting cardboard and newspaper. And just to kind of give a bit of framework, so I had a very traditional landscape architectural teaching in college, got really interested in natives and then started working with different installers. I was doing the design, they were doing the installation, and they kept telling me about this newspaper sheet mulch, and I'd never heard about it and didn't know about it, but they gradually kind of changed my thinking and got me to try it. And I realized it really works. And the idea behind this is back when we had newspapers for free, we would lay the newspapers out, just like you can see in that picture there on the right-hand side. And then we would wet it because otherwise it would go away. Found that out the hard way. And then they would put the mulch on top. And the idea there is that the annual weeds or the leftover grass wouldn't be able to come up. We would use maybe, 6 or 8 thicknesses of sheets of newspaper. And it would really help because instead of having to disturb the whole site and take out the whole lawn, you can just cut it down, cover it, and then put the wood chips on. So you're keeping your good soil structure, you're keeping all your good microorganisms, and then as the newspaper breaks down, all of the fibers in that actually feed the soil. So this is a really good thing to do instead of plastic because black plastics that you'll see on landscapes, they don't break down, weeds still grow between them, and then eventually when they do, they leave bits of plastic everywhere. This is actually designed to break down, and it keeps all that first flush of weeds from coming up, and then by then you've stifled your annual weed population and you're able to get your plants established. So now because newspaper isn't something we can acquire, we use rolled cardboard. If I had time and energy as a homeowner, I would go collect cardboard, and that's an option too. We do this every single day, and we cannot possibly collect enough cardboard. So we end up using rolled cardboard. I've also used rolled sheets of brown craft paper, craft with a K, that's just non-dyed, really natural type of paper. That works pretty well as long as you do multiple layers and don't walk on it too much because you'll poke through with your shoes. The cardboard's pretty good about you being able to walk on it as you're doing it. And on the resources sheet, which we now all have because everybody went up and got it, you'll find on the back wood chip sources, cardboard sources, and I'm sure there's others, but these are just some of the ones I use often. So different ways you can do with the cardboard and the sheet mulching. The great thing about this is you almost can't go wrong no matter what order you do it. There's ways to figure it out no matter what order you want to do it. Here, this person had the grass. They made sure it wasn't too tall. If you have tall weeds, you do have to cut them down with a string line trimmer or a mower or hand shears or something, because it will be very difficult to get it smothered down enough to put the cardboard on top. But this is a good example of boxes, individual boxes that this person got for free. Overlap them. You want to do at least like a 6-inch overlap to try to get the weeds to not go around them. Recognize that if you have a couple of the perennial type weeds, oxalis, the Bermuda buttercup, or Bermuda grass, they are so vigorous that they can often find their way around. So doing multiple layers or just accepting the fact you're going to have to do some hand pulling, but you're going to make it much more difficult for those weeds. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the third presentation when I talk about maintenance. But this will help you a lot. So the first option is smother it with cardboard, put chips on top. You can use, in this picture, free wood trimmers chips. So if you have an arborist come trim a tree in your neighborhood, or you contact a company, oftentimes they're very flexible and willing to come drop off chips because it saves them a trip to the landfill. And then those chips are free. They're not always the prettiest chips, but if you want them to look nicer, you can get some free chips and then cover them with some of the nicer ones on top. And they're pretty good source as far as health for the plants. You do want to make sure the tree that they're giving you the chips from was not a diseased tree. And when you get the chips dropped off, recognize those piles from the tree trimmers are hot and they will be composting. So if you leave the pile there, it will actually steam up and get kind of fungusy, and I've had to wear a mask to protect myself from those. But if you spread the chips quickly, you will not have that problem. So like within a couple of days, it's usually pretty good. But free is free, and so that's a great option. There's a couple services called Chip Drop and a few others that will connect you with arborists to drop free chips. This is an example of a lawn after sheet mulching. So it pretty much just looks like chips, and it's ready to do something with. You can have a couple different methods for how you do the cover. You can plant first and then put your cardboard around it. Or if you're lucky enough to find newspaper, you can put newspaper around it. So basically you would do your planting, then you would do your cardboard like surface, and then you would put the chips. So that's the planting first method. That works great. You just have to make sure you don't step on your plants. The second is, this is also planting first method, but a bigger space. So in this area, this was a more of a installation project that we did for a homeowner, and we used the rolled sheets of cardboard, and we roll them out in long areas, cut around where the plants are, and then put the chips there. And this is also a good example of how much space is between the plants. And this, some of these plants are 5, 6, 7 foot spreaders, so there's the space at the beginning. You can do the cardboard first method and put a little bit of compost on top of it, like they did here. You don't need to do a lot of compost because we don't want to make the soil so rich that the plants grow like crazy and then overextend themselves and die, which I have done as well, like putting too much compost on a native plant. You can see here that they're not doing staking or putting any other material in the cardboard to keep it down. You don't need to do that as long as you're putting some kind of chips on top of it right away. The chips will hold it down. So we don't need any metal stakes or anything. And definitely no plastic. Here's another cardboard first method where we put the cardboard down and the chips, and now we're placing the plants and we're going to plant into that. So that's sort of method 2. I'll go back real quick. So method 1 is planting first. Method 2 is cardboard first. And this is cardboard first. If you do the cardboard first, and then you put the chips on top, you can actually push the chips aside, put a little blob of soil there, and plant right into that soil if you're planting a small plant, like a 4-inch size or a 1-gallon size. The other thing you can do is you can push the chips aside, cut a little hole in the cardboard, and then prepare and plant. But this is a great method because it leaves the plants up a little higher, and I like it. Okay, we're going to move on to how to plant. So we have an idea of how we've sculpted, an idea of how we're going to cover, whether we're going to cover first and then plant, or plant first and then cover. Now we need to think about how we're actually going to put the plants in the ground, and it's a little bit different than you might have done with a traditional horticultural plant that likes a lot of water. We're going to keep things a little bit higher. In general, we're going to use smaller container sizes. And the benefit of doing this, using like a 1-gallon or 4-inch size container, is that the plant will have been in that pot for less time. And typically it doesn't have a lot of roots yet. It won't be as root bound. It will not have been in the container for several years. It's going to be positioned to grow a lot faster in that smaller size and will surpass the 5-gallon size or the larger size. The only time I make an exception to this general idea is, sometimes you just need something because it's so bare, or you have a focal point plant and you want to get a slightly larger plant for that. But in general, this is a good thing because if you can possibly plant in a 1-gallon size, your plants will do better and you'll save money because they are a lot less expensive. They're also a lot easier to dig the holes, which is good. We don't need any fertilizer. It will just shorten the lifespan of the plant. The little bit of soil preparation that we're going to do and the wood chips and the decomposition of that will be plenty for the native plants. And we're going to plant them a little bit higher, which is about 1 inch above the soil level, and I'll show some pictures of that here. The other thing to think about is we need to make sure that we know we're planting, in this case, a drought-tolerant California native plant, but when we first put that plant in the ground, it is not a drought-tolerant plant. What makes it drought tolerant is developing a big, extensive root system. And so we have to get it watered first so it can develop that root system, and then it will be drought tolerant. Just a quick little diagram of how to plant. You have the root ball there in kind of the middle and the whiter stippled area, and you want to do at least twice as wide as the plant. If you can do 3 times as wide of the plant, that's also good. You don't need to dig it any deeper than the plant because you want the plant to kind of sit on some sort of a base. So it doesn't need to go that much deeper. If you happen to do it a little bit deeper, it's okay. You haven't, caused any kind of a calamity. You can just fill it back up and gently tamp it down. So wider, and then you put the plant up just a little bit and you make sure that any wood chips you're putting on there don't kind of cause the plant to be down in a little pit or divot. So keep it up a little bit. This is some pictures of the planting process. So first, in this case, I'm planting in an area that already had mulch in it. So I'm pushing the mulch to the side. I am clearing it out. Then I'm digging my hole twice as wide as the root ball there. You can see my little drip irrigation tubing is already there because it was existing. Then you turn the plant can over, pop the plant out of the can. In most cases, you'll see some sort of roots there. If you don't see any roots and it kind of is so young that it's kind of falling apart, it may be a little early to plant in the first place. So you might put it back in the can and wait a little while. Ideally, before you pop it out of the can, you've watered it. So if the plant is super dry or even medium dry, give it some, hose watering or watering can. Make sure it's quite moist when you first take it out of the can. And if that's not the case, you can usually water them, set them aside while you're digging your holes, and then come back in and they'll be kind of evenly moist. The reason behind this is you're going to keep the roots together a little bit better as you dump it out and go to plant it, but also because as the roots get exposed to the air and messed up a little bit with our fingers, we want them to be moist roots, not dry roots. So we pop it out of the can, we've made it moist, we see that there's roots there, we can take a finger, we can take the little shears and just kind of ruffle up the roots a little bit. We don't want to leave it sort of set in that circular area that formed the shape of the can because it will just kind of keep sitting in that space and it won't branch out into the new soil as readily. And then I'll even go a little further. I will take my fingers and actually rough a little bit off the top of the soil and the sides. So, and just want to make sure that it's kind of fully has some places to grow out and it's not going to be stuck there with its potted soil. The other thing that happens is the soil that's used in the nursery cans is very different from the soil in our gardens. And that soil, if left to its own little shape of the can when it's planted, will often dry out. Even if the soil around it is wet, that soil will just get super dry. It will almost get hydrophobic, like it won't let the water in to the roots of the plant. So all of this roughing up of the root ball will help better intermix that soil with the natural soil of your garden. And as you're taking it off this plant, you're just kind of dumping it in around the soil you're going to use to backfill your hole. So it's, in a way, it's like getting free planting mix when you do that. And then we're going to use 25% or less of added planting mix, so just a little bit of planting mix. If your soil is already pretty loose and maybe you don't even need any planting mix, but most of us will use just a little bit just to kind of break the clay up just enough to get some better drainage in there. We will put the plant in, kind of set it in, make sure that its height is going to be where we want it to be. Sometimes as I'm backfilling, I realize, oh, that plant is kind of sunk a little bit and I need to just pull it up a bit and put some more soil underneath it. And recognize that once you plant it and you water it, it will sink a bit. So it's better to even leave it up a little higher, better a little higher than lower. So take it there. Then you gently fill the soil back around. And then you just gently pat, no stepping on it with your foot, just gentle pats with your fingers. And then this picture on the right is supposed to demonstrate, it's very difficult to photograph, that there's slope around the plant, where the plant is actually kind of a little bit higher than the soil around. I'm going to continue in this sequence to show you exactly what I did with this plant with the drip irrigation, and then I'll go in and talk about drip systems a little bit later. So in this case, I've just planted my plants. I already have my drip line next to it. I'm going to go ahead and use this purple thing, which is an emitter punch tool. And I'm going to put the emitters in the pipe right next to my plant. And you just insert the emitter into this little tool, and then you just poke it in the pipe. So there it is. I've put it in the pipe. I've put one on either side of the plant. And then I'm going to use these plastic stakes and that little 1/4" tubing to direct the water to the plant. The reason I put the emitters in the poly pipe, I call it, is because if a squirrel comes and chews it, or an animal of any kind, or it gets snipped, then you're not going to get a huge geyser of water shooting up because your water control flow, the emitter, is already in the pipe there. So it's not going to dribble any more out than the 1 gallon or 2 gallons emitted that emitter. So it helps control a lot of leaks later. And then here we are, we have the drip put in, and we're putting our tubes around the plant and then adding the cardboard around the plant. In this case, I put the cardboard underneath the drip. You can do either one. It can go on top of the drip, it can go below the drip. It's really up to you. Since the cardboard will decompose, even if you put the cardboard over the drip, you can actually feel it in most cases, but it will decompose and you'll still have access to your drip for time if needed. And then after that, I will put some wood chips on top and cover it. And then just make sure that the plant itself doesn't have too many wood chips piled around its base and it's clear. And then after this is all done, there's one really important thing to do at the end, which is water it. Make sure to water it again. So you water it in a can, you make sure it's super moist, and then you plant it, and then you water it again. And you give it a pretty good soaking around the plant, but also around all the area that you're hoping the roots will grow into, so that the whole thing is moist. Even if it's going to rain, as long as if it's going to rain heavily, you can probably skip the second watering. But if you're not 100% sure and it's cool weather, you can go ahead and water it because it'll probably be fine unless a large storm is coming in. In that case, skip it. And the other thing I can tell you about planting and watering is that there are some variations of this. And I think one thing that's interesting about the landscape community is everybody has their sort of method, their method of irrigating, their method of planting. So you will see some slight variations on this. And one of the resources I put on the handout is called the Watershed Approach booklet. It's on the same page as the nurseries. This is the booklet. And this has descriptions of a lot of things that I'm talking about. One of them is a planting process, which is similar but slightly different. It involves a little bit more intermediate watering steps, but this is a great guide. It's available online, as that link shows on the handout, but goes through a lot of different things that you'll find useful and practical for planting. These are my 2 favorite shovels. Because I'm short and not super strong, I like to use one of those very narrow trenching type shovels when I plant. I find I can just get right down in there, and the broader shovels for me are very difficult to use. And then the bottom one is a tiny little shovel. I originally bought it for my son as a beach shovel, but now it's mine. I'm not using it anymore. But it's great for like little 4-inch plants, or when you're planting in the winter and the soil is really soft, you can just kind of use that and get in and plant something super quickly. So those are 2 things that I use. My husband will use a traditional, large, broad, big shovel, and that's great for him. But I thought that this was a unique thing that works for me. So watering systems, there's several different ways to think about how we're going to water the garden, and I will go through those. The first thing I want to talk about is what makes the plant water efficient in the first place. And we did touch on this a little bit earlier, but the idea is it's adapted to the local conditions. That means that it's adapted to being dry in the summer and wet in the winter. And it has an extensive root system to get to this point. So we're trying to build that extensive root system. And we're thinking about that in the way we water with our hose or our drip system. How are we going to help it build an extensive root system? And adapted with microorganisms, we already talked about that. Some plants take a summer rest. So it's okay with a lot of our plants that they do go kind of a little dormant. They maybe don't look as lively and full and robust. And that is part of their natural cycle. So recognizing that and allowing for that to happen versus trying to water it like it's spring all year round will help keep that plant alive in the long term. And there are some slight modifications you can do, like maybe water every 4 to 6 weeks during the summer, just to give a little bit of something so the plant doesn't look totally curled up and dead, but it also survives. So thinking just in general about the fact that we're working with plants that are often dormant. The drought tolerant plant needs water to get established. We talked about this before already, I think, that plants receive the regular water and we're trying to transition them. The general overview of how to do that is to give the plant extra attention the first 2 to 3 years, and particularly the first warm summer. And how the precise method of what we do that depends a little bit on when we planted it. So if we planted it in winter and then it got rainwater for several months by the time it got to now, April or May, then our summer watering is going to be a little bit easier than if we're planting the plant now and it's a tiny little plant and it's trying to survive the summer and has 0 roots right now. So just thinking through that, if we plant it in fall, we need to water a little bit, then it gets the rains, and then by the time it comes to spring and summer, it's already pretty decently established. So my general rule of thumb is to check it about once a week, and I'll have a slide that specifically explains that in more detail. If you're just planting right now when it's already 80 degrees some days, it's going to be a little riskier. You'll probably want to check it at least twice a week. Water deeply and infrequently in general. So rather than do a spritz like 5 minutes a day every single day, we want to transition so that we're watering once a week, once every 2 weeks, even once every 3 or 4 weeks or less as we go along. So at first we're watering a little bit more because the plant is small and we need to transition it from that nursery plant. But then as it gets established over year 2 and year 3, we're going to water less often and less often, less often. I think I mentioned here, also to water during the cool times of the day. So watering in the late evening, starting about now to dusk, even after dusk and before dawn is ideal because the soil is going to be cooler, less chance of having fungus that's not beneficial to the plant during winter. And I will talk about drip, spray, and hose options as well. The first thing is that each zone is a watering group relating to those hydrozones I was talking about before. So each of those hydrozones is a zone, and each of those zones will have one of these, an irrigation valve, if you're using drip or spray irrigation. And these are called anti-siphon valves. They pop up above the ground and then go back down in. They have backflow built into them. So the water comes from your hose, goes down in a pipe, comes up through here, and this valve controls on and off of each zone. And each of these valves has a wire, which goes to your controller. And you can see the one on the right just has straight white pipes. That's a spray zone. And the 2 on the left have a little black knob sticking out, and that is a filter and a pressure regulator. And that's what's needed for a drip irrigation system. There's actually a little piece there on the bottom that screws off, and if you screw that off, you'll find a little filter in there that can be cleaned about once a year. Or if you're like me, never. And it usually still survives okay, but ideally you clean them once a year. You clean them before spring, before you're going to start doing your system operating again. And then you can see in front of here, there's a little white thing sticking out of the ground. That is just the stub up of where the pipe transitions to drip line. So it's just a little PVC pipe making an angle, and then you're sticking your drip pipe in there, and then you're winding your drip pipe wherever you want to get to your plants. Then if you look to the left of these irrigation valves, you'll see that green box there, and that is a shutoff valve. So it's a little box, round box with a lid. You take that off, and in that area is a little shutoff, and you can turn it on or off. The reason that this is such a good, important idea to put before any group of valves is it means that you can turn off the water to all those valves. So if one of them malfunctions, if the gasket on it, the little rubber piece starts to leak, if it just gets old and needs repair, you can turn off the water to those. It doesn't affect the water going into your house. You can still use your house water, but you can repair your irrigation system. It's really convenient and not very expensive to do. So if you're installing yourself or having someone install, have them put what's called a shutoff valve or a valve or a gate valve in one of those little boxes. So different types of ways to water plants. Spray irrigation is typical of like what you'd see in a lawn, but you will sometimes see this with shrubs where there's a sprinkler that sticks out of the ground and just sprays water. It's great because you can get a lot of water out there, you can see the water if people like it because you can tell when it's on, you can tell when it's off. The negatives to that are that by watering the whole entire area above the ground, you're going to encourage a lot of weeds. The other thing is you'll get water runoff because that water doesn't spray in a perfect line. It will run off to the side and often overspray onto a sidewalk, a driveway, a walkway. And not only can it stain those surfaces, but it can just be lost water. The other thing is that you'll have evaporation because the water is being projected out into the air and therefore more of it's just going to get absorbed into the air. If it's hot or windy, you'll get more evaporation and more loss because the wind will blow the water away. I do use it sometimes for grasslands or meadows, although now with the introduction of the inline drips that I'll show you, we can actually use those for meadows. So I would rarely install a spray system, and very rarely would I ever use one for a native plant garden unless I just happen to come upon one with very tall risers. Because if you have the short ones that are 4 inches or 6 inches high that you'll typically see for lawn, and you try to plant a garden of mixed plants, they're just going to hit the first plant and they'll probably never get into the homes. So there are people who strongly believe that drip irrigation for natives is not a good thing and do not like to use it. But in our area, I work with many contractors and many designers who've had a lot of success with drip irrigation. So it's definitely possible. The other idea is hand watering, and a lot of times this gets discounted because we think up to ourselves, oh, we're putting in plants, we need to put a drip system in, that's what we're doing. But I have used hand watering in my own garden pretty extensively and drip systems. I also do have some clients who are on a very tight budget, and if you can put more of your money into plants and less into irrigation, you can get a lot more planting. If you're going to design your garden for extremely low water plants that don't need summer water once they're established, you could be looking at hand watering, especially for a smaller yard. You know, you could water that garden once a week for the first summer, once every 2 weeks for the second summer, and then you can pretty much let it be after that. So depending on the plant type, the specific niche of how very low water your plants are, hand watering can be a really viable option for establishing a native garden. And you're definitely saving plastic, which is a great thing to do. And you're spending time watering, you're actually looking at your plants, which can be some ways more successful because you know, I gave this plant water, you can see it going on, it has that benefit of the spray irrigation without some of the detriments. You can get the hose down closer, you're not going to have as much overspray or weeding issues. And hand watering can be especially effective if you have an existing garden with mature plants and then you put a few new things in that garden because you don't want to water the new plants the same as you water the existing plants. Those plants probably don't need as much water. You'd be overwatering them. So just to hand water those new plants until established can be a great way to go. It does take more time, but depending on the size of your yard, it can be a nice time. So drip irrigation is the most common type of system I'll put in. I use 2 different types in particular. People who are busy, who want to travel, it's a great way to get the garden started and very time efficient, relatively easy to install. It can be done by somebody themselves. It can also be done, the actual tubing part can be done yourself if you're not comfortable with installing the PVC and the valves. You can hire someone to do that, and then you can run your tubing around. It's available from various suppliers, and it's kind of fun to do it actually. There's 2 different types I use. The first is called a point source, and that's that 1/2-inch poly pipe. The second is called inline drip, and that's more of a gridded system or a ring system. And I will show you pictures of those 2 systems. So this is called point source. This is the same one I showed earlier where I was showing the little emitter tool and punching that emitter into the pipe. And what's typically done with this is you'll have that black polyethylene tubing. You'll put your plants in. You'll run that tubing all around in whatever shape you want to get to your plants. It can be straight, it can be curved. You can get as close to the plants as you want to get the emitters close, which means you don't have to use as much of the little tiny 1/4" tubes. And then you punch in emitters for every plant. If you do this type, you want to make sure you put more than one emitter per plant. You'll often see people, even licensed professional contractors, put just one emitter on one side of the plant. And I never understood how that's going to work because only one side of the plant is going to get watered. Or they're putting it so close to the root ball of the plant, it'll probably rot the plant. So I would use 2 or 3 emitters for every single plant. This one has, I think, 2 for these little yarrows and more like 3 or 4 for some of the bigger plants. And you can see on the bigger ceanothus, they actually did a ring around that one. And there's a little green knob right in the middle of the picture there. That is a drip shutoff valve. You can buy those and you can actually put them in between your drip pipe. And if it's going parallel to the pipe, it's on, and twisted, it will be off. And I will use these in designs where I have manzanitas, tree or bush, or tree or bush ceanothus species, the California lilac. The reason I do this is because those plants are going to want way less water than some of the other natives. So in this case, we have yarrow, and then we have a ceanothus. And in year 2, I'm going to take that shutoff valve and just turn it off, and I'm not going to water that ceanothus anymore. But the yarrows would still benefit from watering every week or 2. And that just allows me to kind of get a little bit more fine-tuned control over what I'm doing without putting in a separate zone just for those plants. And they're really inexpensive too. They're like a couple, I don't know, $4 or so a piece. So point source drip irrigation, again, is when you run tube, you put emitters into it with a punch tool, and you put the emitters where you want to around the plants. This can be a great system if you have a huge space and you have only incremental plants, like a plant here and another plant 5, 6, or 10 feet away, because you're not watering the whole entire area. So it means that you're using less water and you're putting it just where the plants are. If you do have a plant with a really big spread and you want to put more emitters further out, this is something you can do with point source as well. So you can have a 6-foot spreaded plant and either come back in later or at the beginning, put some drippers 3 to 4 foot out to water the future roots of that plant. So the second type of drip that I use a lot is called inline drip, gridded drip, and there's various companies that make a product now. It used to be that it was only Netafim, it was a Netafim product, but then the other manufacturers started realizing that this was great and they started manufacturing the same types of tubing. They are, in my experience, fairly equal to each other. They're not super different in price or functioning. Netafim is one of the more common ones just because it's been around for 30 or 40 years, even though we've only been using it here for a decade or 2. And with these, you basically use them in a grid system in a line. And the emitters are built into the tubing itself. And you can specify the distance that you want apart. There's usually like a 12-inch spacing, an 18-inch, sometimes even more. And then you can decide how far apart you want the tubes to be. So if you have a really tight plant spacing, like in this yard where there's lots of little perennials and grasses, you can do a 12-inch emitter spacing and a 14-inch row spacing. But if you have a landscape with bigger plants that are going to spread more, you can do more like an 18 or even a 24-inch spacing. And typically the sweet spot for me is get your emitter spacing closer on your tube. So do like a 12-inch emitter spacing, and then put your tubes a little bit farther apart if you want to. Because that way you're going to have less tubing overall, because your emitters are closer on the tube, but farther and later. So it's less labor, right, to put the tubes farther apart than put more tubes, but emitters farther apart. So emitter spacing of 12 inches is really great. There's different flow rates on the emitters. The most common one is about 0.5 gallon an hour or 0.6 gallon an hour. You can also go to a 0.9 gallon an hour. They're slower flow than the point source. So this one here, the red ones in this one are typically 2 gallons an hour. The white ones are typically 1 gallon an hour. And then on this one, it's 0.5 gallon an hour. So these systems, when you run them way longer because the water's coming out slower from those emitters. So that's just something to know when you put your drip system in or have one installed. What is the rate? What's the application rate, it's called, of how quickly the water's going down? And that way you'll know how long do I have to run it to get the amount of water I want. You know, if I want 1 gallon of water to be placed near my plant, how long am I running that with the emitter right now? Here's another inline drip irrigation example. And then this is what it looks like inside the pipe with the emitter there. The water actually kind of flows through a zigzaggy thing and then comes out the emitter. General guidelines about how long to water. The water duration is about until plants are evenly moist. So the first time you water, you're going to check your plant, your fingers with a moisture meter, make sure it's getting totally wet. Because if it's not getting wet, then each cycle you run, the plant isn't going to get evenly moist. So you water to saturation. Run your drip system, check for adequate saturation. Avoid watering frequently in small amounts, like we talked about. And the frequency of how long you want to water, you're going to check once to twice a week after first establishing. And then the first winter, you're going to check about after the first winter, so that first next warm season, you'll check about every 2 weeks. And then after the second winter, about every 3 weeks. And of course, you're going to adjust a little bit based on the type of species, the low water versus very low water species. But this is kind of a good starting point, a good rule of thumb. There's some great apps here for water scheduling. These are designed by a local irrigation designer of note, Lori Palmquist. She gives lots of irrigation lectures that are really good. She is an inline drip aficionado. She loves to schedule it and teach it. And so she has an inline drip scheduler. And the link on the top is how much water. You can go to that link, put in the plant you have, put in the city that you're at, and then it'll tell you how much water during different times of month based on, is it a high water plant, low water, medium water. And if you're putting new plants in the ground and it's going to get hot, you're going to treat those at the beginning like a high water plant because they need more water at the beginning to get established. So you can kind of fiddle with that and find out. It'll tell you in gallons, oh, it needs 1 gallon, half a gallon, etc. per week. But it's really helpful. I'm waiting for a few pictures here. Okay. I'm going to try to wrap up quickly because I'm supposed to be done soon. Checking plants for moisture. Use a moisture meter, your finger in the soil. You can buy these things. They're pretty inexpensive from local garden supply centers, about $10 to $15. Poke them in the ground. Realize, though, they are a pretty inexpensive tool, so they're not perfect. But just poking them in and using your finger and your eye, all of those things will help you. If it's going to be very hot, make sure to water 1 or 2 days in advance before it gets hot. Smart controllers can be great. They're controllers that actually help you adjust water based on actual weather data. So they can help you by turning themselves off when it's raining, adjusting for wind and heat. And if you're using a standard controller, the kind you have to program yourself, at the very least, adjust it quarterly. So adjust it before spring, summer, and kind of late fall. Or monthly is even better because our months are quite different. June is different than October as far as water needs. So if you can adjust it monthly, that's awesome. If you don't get around to it, please at least adjust it quarterly. And at the very, very least, turn it off in the winter. So if it's dry for 3-4 weeks in a row, yes, you may need to water. But if it's decently rainy, keep it off during the winter. The only other important thing to think about here is that most of our natives do actively grow in January, February, and into March. So if we have a very dry January like we did this year, you do want to give them water so that they can actually grow during that time. It's almost more important to water them during the winter and early spring than it is during the summer because you're setting them up for summer success. And I learned this multiple times during droughts when I didn't water my plants and then they were suffering terribly in the summer. I'm just going to show real quick, and then I'll wrap up, a couple example projects of before and after. So this is the lawn before, and again before. I want to give special credit to the installation team I've been working with for over a decade. Chaya Bonse, who's an awesome installer, him and his 4 guys have done all these projects This is what it looked like after they sculpted the mounts. So same project, land sculpting, plants, placed them out there. I laid them all out and we figured out where they're gonna go, made sure they're spaced appropriately. And then here they are planting them on planting day. You can see some are strategically on a berm or to the side of a berm, and some are down in a flatter area. And then here they are actually planting them, breaking the roots apart. In this case, gophers. So we decided to use gopher baskets. Some pros and cons about that, which I probably don't have the time to talk about, but we can talk about it during Q&A if anybody's interested. Here we are after planting when everything's in the ground. They did make some little mounds around the plant, which I would have had them smooth out, but here's the drip irrigation. So after the irrigation's in, this picture here, you can actually see they did plant it up a little high. It's kind of hard to tell, but the plants are raised up a little bit. So there's the drip irrigation, and then here they are with the cardboard and mulch cover. And then here they are with the completed project. And you can see a lot of mulch, very few plants, but this is okay. This is not a bad thing. And I'm going to skip forward and just show you a couple others before, during, inline drip, and after. And then I wanted to show you, let's see, this is helpful because it's a before, a middle, and an after. And so you can really see how, oh, it's more bare. This is about maybe 8 months after planting, 9 months, and then really filled in. And then this is the same thing, cutting around the edge of the lawn, making berms, leaving some of the lawn, sheet mulching, and this is about 2 years after. Another view, sort of the same thing, with cutting around the edge, making mounds. The orange areas where we're going to excavate down and put in more of like a rainwater catchment. And then about a year or so after planting, and then totally filled in. So it looks sparse, but then they really do fill in. And I want to make sure everybody knows about the rebates that are available through Valley Water for taking out lawn and putting in plants, $2 a square foot, sometimes more depending on where you live. And they also have rebates for irrigation controllers, rainwater, and gray water too. So lots of good information there, valleywater.org. And I will wrap this up so we can do Q&A for a little bit because we have about 20 minutes before we need to be. Clark, yes, it's for one. Okay. Yeah. So thank you all for being here. And if you have questions, I'll just go ahead and call on people with raised hands. Thanks for coming. Thanks for making your way out of your homes to be here. I really appreciate it. Do we have another mic for the questions?
Yes, I'll pass it around. Yes. Yeah.
Anyone with a question? Yes.
So like we put in a point,